welcome to this edition of Mbogi ya MaWriters from the Multimedia Library of the Alliance Française de Nairobi. Soyez les bienvenus. And do allow me to sit down. Done. You are going to be witness in this edition to the online launch, the historic online launch of The Phantom, Book 2 in the Twisted Times trilogy by Mr. Vincent de Paul, who is right here beside me.
Thank you.
Welcome to the Mbogi ya MaWriters. And I will tell you, Vincent de Paul, that your book, 2, The Phantom, in the Twisted Times trilogy, meaning one of a set of 3, comprises 84 chapters, plus an epilogue, spread over 393 pages. So allow me to start with a short sampler of your writing style quite early on in the narrative, if you can bear my reading. We're on page 4, going across to page 5. As the killer car, what he had started calling it in his mind, came in line with him again, he noticed it was an SUV, spiced up for both on and off-road operation. It was carefully selected, for bizarre activities like this was beginning to feel like. Before the thought materialized in his mind, which was on overdrive, like his car, the killer car rammed the side of his car, forcing him off the road. Justin thought of slamming the brakes and making an instant U-turn, a daring stunt he had seen in the movies, but he would roll over if he did that. He was not ready to die today, at least not by his own making or mistakes. He would fight till the end of the road. He tried to steady his vehicle, force it to move ahead, but the SUV was not relenting. When he was left with no option, he did what he had thought of doing in the first instance. He stepped hard on the brakes and floored the accelerator as he worked for a hard right U-turn that would indefinitely force the SUV off the road instead of him. However, just as he had been wrong all along, he was the one who was run off the road. His car rolled 3, 4, 5 times before it came to a dead stop off the road, wheels facing up. Kumbe, the airbag works, he thought to himself. We are in detective novel territory. We're in the realms of murder, finding out the who did it. And I, in reading this book, put myself in the mind of a young child, the kind of person who peppers their question by saying, why, daddy, why uncle, why auntie, why, how, what, when? So in preparation for our conversation, I have a series of whys, mostly, and I want to see where they lead us. So, Vincent de Paul, once again, welcome to Mbogi ya MaWriters.
Yes, thank you.
Are you sitting comfortably?
Yes, I am.
Then I'll begin.
Okay.
Uncle, why do you choose Vincent de Paul as your author's name?
It is my name, and that's what I was called by Mama.
Uncle, is that what you have on your ID card?
Yes, that's what I have. You want to confirm? But unaweza hakikisha na Safaricom.
Asante, Uncle.
Thank you.
Let's reject the kiddie voice for the rest of the conversation. Why have you opted for self-publishing? Would you recommend it to aspiring writers?
Yes, I would recommend self-publishing to aspiring writers. And the reason I opted for self-publishing is because, one, our Kenyan publishing industry, there is a challenge. The kind of stories that I write, that is pop or genre literature, they are not accepting for quite some time. Even poetry, it was a challenge to get to them. It's not that I did not try, I tried. And in the end, self-publishing was introduced to me by a poet friend of mine. And since then, I've continued in self-publishing. What I can say, in self-publishing, you have the freedom of action. You have the freedom to publish what you want. Only that you have to make sure it will be as professional as any other traditionally published book.
I'm told, and I'm sure you can come back to me on this, is that you lose out if you wanted to win the Nobel Prize for Literature, for example, without the legitimacy of having a professional publishing house, you would never be in the running as a self-publisher. Is that true?
Yes, it is true. Example is the BART Award, which comes most of the time to Africans, for young African writers. They want traditionally published books. For self-published books, the stigma that has been attached to it is that it is poor quality, it is not well done, and it lacks what is required to meet the threshold. Rightly so, because some of us self-publishers, we are vanity publishing. We just want to see our name out in the print. That is why it will be a challenge to see a Nobel Prize for self-published writers. However, if we make it and focus on professionalism, we can convince them to accept our books.
I'm going to ask why in the opening page you describe yourself as Kenya's best-selling flash fiction writer, poet, and novelist. Why do you describe yourself as the best?
The best flash fiction, but about poetry and novelist, not yet, because we know there are others who have preceded me, and they are doing better. They are well acknowledged. The best part is for the flash fiction.
What is flash fiction?
Flash fiction, these are stories which are 6 words long, minimum, up to 1,000 words long. So they are shorter than a short story. And in my research, I found that most of Kenyan writers have not ventured into flash fiction, but they are short story writers. So in that case, I'm the best because no one else is giving me competition.
That's a good answer. I'd like you to comment on the fact that this idea of writing popular fiction, pop fiction, for people of my generation, the author that always comes to mind is one David Mailu, After 4:30, and we were always encouraged not to read that kind of literature because it wasn't real literature. As somebody who writes pop fiction, what is your response to that dismissal?
That dismissal is misinformed and meant to malign other writers. Pop literature is literally like another, and we cannot have everyone fitting into the literary space. I have seen that most literary fiction writers are termed to be intellectuals, the likes of Ngugi wa Thiong'o, and others who follow in the footsteps of literary fiction. However, the genre fiction is about entertainment. There is no deep symbolisms. There is no hidden messages. Even if there is some vice that is being revoked, there are themes which are there. The aim of this pop literature is not intellectualism, but to entertain. And that is how I think Hollywood has been one of the highest dollar industries because of that.
Right. I accept that answer. I'm going to ask you why you chose or have chosen, because the flash fiction is on the side, you've written lots of it, you've written poetry, and the table is strewn with other books that you've written. Inevitable Desires, Vincent de Paul, Flashes of Vice, a collection of flash fiction, Volume 1, Volume 2, Volume 3, Musings of a Bachelorette, a novella, Twisted Times, Son of Man, that was the first in the trilogy. Why this desire, if the book is 395 pages long, why are you going to take us through these similar characters, not only in one book, but in 3 others? Why the trilogy? And have I missed out because for Mbogi, I was only told to read and launch Volume 2?
Yes, I think you have missed a lot, which is in this one, which is in Son of Man. That is the foundation of where this story is coming from. And the trilogy part of it is, I want to continue this story so that we can have connection with characters over time. And I have used the trilogy because it is a serialized form. There are 2 types of series. There is formulaic. Formulaic is whereby you just have a standalone, but it is in a series. Serialized is where you have each book leading to the next, and each subplot, each plot will be finalized in another. So I'm kind of creating a world whereby we relate with the characters there.
There's one question. I'm a human being, I'm an individual. I walk into a bookshop and I see The Phantom, book 2. Are you saying to me that I should go to the guy at the till and say, please give me book 1 first?
Yes, I would recommend that. Because
so I'm paying double. Money is an issue. Money's an issue.
Yes, money is an issue.
We normally buy books because we can afford them, and the average book in Nairobi nowadays costs 1,000 bob. So the minute I start reading Vincent de Paul, I should be ready to budget 3,000 shillings.
Yes, any book lover, they love buying books, no matter how much it costs. They'll not go for the PDFs which are being peddled online. So I would recommend you go to the first book, then you move to the next. However, that is from your side. From my side, it's also a marketing strategy. For Twisted Times, Son of Man, to remain in market, I will have to force you to go back to it because you'll not get the story in the final episode.
So you can read the stories backwards. I can read book 2 and find out what happened to lead to the one I'm just reading.
You can do that when you want to know now, this is where I am, but what is the beginning? You can do that.
Right. Well, from book 2, Vincent de Paul, I gathered that somebody was killed. That car chase led to a death, and then we want to find out who killed him and why. And I might say that on page 393, we have an idea who killed him, and now everybody is in pursuit. So have you written book 3, the why, the kiddie question? Do you write them all in one go, or do you make it up as you go along?
I write after each volume. Once it's done, I write another one, and it's already in my head.
But there's this whole notion of plotting. Are you plotting a book ahead?
Yes.
Or are you surprising yourself? Book 2 ended this way, and the final volume is going to end with the dead person coming to life, just to be a bit facetious.
I already have the story figured out. And also, maybe to preempt, it might not end with a trilogy, because the story, the way it is panning out, it might end up with another volume for Endgame, where all the characters now are punished.
Okay. So we open the book and we have to show it to everybody. You start off by introducing a series of chapters, and the word that you use, if you've got the book and have had it signed, is prolegomenon. The prolegomenon. Now, I thought my vocabulary was quite sharp, but I'd never seen that word before in my life. Why are you alienating me by heading a chapter heading with a word that's ununderstandable?
That word, sometimes we writers get into our own world where we think everyone is complex and simple at the same time, like us. So that word is just prologue. It means prologue. I know it will have to force you to look in the dictionary. That
right
was not
from the word
intentional.
go. You're saying, don't read my book. You are wanting, you can't cope. That, I felt, this is not a book for me because I don't understand the beginning.
But inside is different.
Okay. In the acknowledgements at the end, you thank your editor, you thank your reviewers, plural. I read the book in Mwalimu fashion, and I come to a page, and I'm not going to give that away, but I came to a page where I found that in the mix-up of publishing, typing, printing, the names of two characters had been interchanged in order to really throw me off because I was wondering whom we were talking about. And when I alerted to that in our phone conversation, you said that you had missed out on it. The bigger question is the quality of editing in Kenya. You've just said that the self-published writer has to aspire to the highest of standards in order to compete with the publishing houses. And here you are, ending up spelling the word rifle with two Fs, confusing your characters. And it's not just you, it's not personal. I would say that every single book that I read from a Kenyan publishing house has a basic error of spelling, syntax. Is the excuse that we do this because we are Kenyans, we are Africans, and English is not our language, and therefore we're allowed to make mistakes?
No, we are not allowed to make mistakes because we are Africans or Kenyans, or because English is not our native language. What I can say is sometimes, yes, I agree, some publishers could be not so detailed in their process. However, I am addressing the editor themselves. The editor is also human. They also make mistakes. Perhaps when they were reading that page, they were fatigued a little bit. They wanted to finish off, then they decided to leave. I'm not making excuses for them.
There's a backup thing, because in your acknowledgements, I'm dealing with this book,
yes,
you also thank your reviewers. So you had your editor, phase 1, reviewers, page 2. They're all here immortalized for having done what they did for you, but they've actually led you to make mistakes.
The work of reviewers is not to critique according to the general point of view of reviewers, is to read, and they review books for the love of books, for the love of stories. They write whether they loved the story or not. So we cannot put to task them a lot, meaning, why didn't you get this? The whole picture for them is, do I love this story? Do I enjoy it? But the tidbit of editing, it will come now back to the stages of editing.
Thank you. Why do some of your characters have names again? Hedwig as Hedwig Sanzi Joe. Now, first of all, she also appears in Inevitable Desires, which is not part of the trilogy. So we're unpacking the process. Are you milking your initial idea in any shape or form to entice people to read you? Because if we want to hear about Hedwig, we'll find her in this book, First Love. What is the explanation for that?
One, if you go straight to this one, you would have missed a lot. We meet Hedwig here, the last 7 chapters. That's why she meets the main character here, and kind of they fall in love. So with Inevitable Desires, Hedwig is telling her story.
Right. So again, let's look at Kenyan literature. We're doing the sort of Kiarimiti, My Life in Crime. He goes off and does all these robberies, and then there is the story of his girlfriend who tells it from her point of view. So yeah, so somebody else has done that, and people want to turn My Life in Crime into a movie. So definitely it's a way to go. But I want to stay with names just a wee bit longer and look at the names. We're dealing again with Kenyan society, this whole idea of ethnicity. If I have a character called Daniel Otieno, then I have another character called Jim Kariuki, then I have, and you can see where I'm going with this, there is a potential to choose out of the 47, 50 odd communities that we have in Kenya. And I encountered this problem myself as a playwright, that if I gave my characters a certain name, then it was imputed that I was trying to make some major statement about the community from which they came. Is this something that has exercised your mind as a writer, or do you just give your characters names?
There is a process of naming your characters. Apart from coming up with their biologies, how they were born, how they went to school, how they grew up, you also consider their ethnicity, consider their location where they come from, the culture that they have been brought up in. So to answer about my characters, why some of them are Gikuyu, Luo, others are Kamba, you still have to go back to the book 1. Reason being, there is the foundation of all of these.
No, but I wanted you to think empirically as
Yes.
a Kenyan who is into the whole sort of BBI, building bridges, let's get closer. Surely, if we see ourselves mirrored in a text, then we feel a sense of belonging. And I'm saying that you've limited your protagonist to the big 2. And that's rather, I'm just asking whether you think about it. I'm not giving you 0 out of 10 or wanting to whip you anything. I'm just saying, is this something you think about on a clear day, or it doesn't matter?
For me, where they come from, the names are determined by the location they come from, not because of the ethnicity there, but the location. You will not expect to find Mutuas in Turkana. On the first instance you get there, the majority there are Turkana. We are likely to be interacting mostly with Turkana names. So the location determines the name that I'm going to give.
But it was a deep philosophical question. For the Turkana to find himself in the literary sun, are you going to leave it to a Turkana writer to do that? Or are you going to take it upon yourself to go and find out about, set your book in Pokotland or Sabaot, a minority?
It will also be upon me to go to Turkana and research their lifestyle there and have the setting in Turkana.
Thank you. I'm going to ask about dates. And if we read book 2 very carefully, we see that I worked out on one reading, do forgive me, that we are actually setting the narrative in 2023. So lots have happened since. And there are certain things that are set in 2021. In other words, you're looking to the future. But the question I wanted to ask you is that if we live long enough, the future which you presume is going to be the present. So
Yes.
when George Orwell wrote 1984 to signal the end of the world and talks about Big Brother is watching you, well, we've been through 1984 and we're now in 2010. So again, why didn't you just set your book in the present and live with that?
The reason is that first I wrote this book in 2012. That is when it was written. And by then I thought that it will be published immediately. The issues that I was writing about, they could have been happening then, but I wanted to show the futility of it. When it comes to happen and we get to that future, now it becomes the past, my thinking was, I'll not be accused of having prior knowledge or attacking maybe the government, if it comes to that point.
I see. Okay, I'm going to rewind. You know how that you said you forgave your editor. Please forgive me. On the issue of ethnicity, we're on page 67, and within the narrative, we had, and I'm sorry, I don't speak this particular language, but it says, Mukara wa mehia ne geko. So that was fine. And then I moved on, and I found a page where it said, Mteja wa nambari uliopiga hapatikani kwa sasa. And I'm still drawing you as a Kenyan, as a national. Why don't you speak in the voice of the national language throughout? Why shouldn't we make it the agenda for all of us to respond to Kiswahili? Because I do presume that was Gikuyu.
Yes.
But I didn't understand what you were saying. And there's also a letter in where somebody ends and signs off Malish. Now, I know you're going to say, if only I'd read book one, I'd be laughing. But no, I'm still going to draw you on this. What kind of decisions are you making when you write things that half your readership can't understand, let alone the woman living in Surrey or Kent or Cedar Rapids, Iowa?
The issue of foreign language in literature is determined whether you're going to put a translation by the context. And the ensuing context, I worked it out that the reader is going to know why is this character reacting this way. And two, the use of that language. The character themselves is Hedring. Her origin is Kilema in Kilimanjaro, Tanzania. They moved with her mother to Kenya, married a Gikuyu. So she's trying to show this native Gikuyu that I have interacted with your people, I've assimilated, and I know that even the proverbs of your people.
I'm glad you said that, because there is also a point where Hedwig, in terms of your character bio, quotes Shakespeare and says, in her imagination, the lunatic, the lover, the poet are of imagination all compact.
Yes.
If I were to read the backstory, is that your character thinking as Hedwig, or is that Vincent de Paul trying to display a knowledge of the bard?
That is the character thinking like the character themselves. Because
so you've told us at some point that she had an education. That Shakespeare is not part of our syllabus currently. So where did she get it from?
She's a reader. She's a journalist, and she's well-read.
Right. Time is not on our side. I've got so many whys. But one more before we go into another reading. You have two characters, and I know human beings do that. Your protagonist is called Kennedy Paul Maina. But some guys call him Ken, some guys call him Paul, some guys confuse him. You also have Yvonne, Lindsay, and she's Linz. Why are you confusing me as a reader?
I'm not confusing you as a reader, because some characters identify them with the name that they are used. The change to Paul came in the last chapters of Son of Man when he went to church and he adopted the name Paul, alluding to Saul of Damascus when he met Christ. That is why there is that confusion. And you find that those people call you John.
Yes.
Others call you Okumu.
Yes.
So that is the picture that is I'm trying to show.
But there's a proliferation of characters in the trilogy. There are lots of them. There are lots of people to encounter. I'm siding with the reader because at times, if I were to be a reviewer, the explanation is sound, but I'm wondering whether the writer should make the reader think that hard. I don't know. There are writers here, but I want to read something else. I want to read something else because time isn't on our side. We've got something in the region of 10 minutes, slightly more, to stick to our master plan of 45. So do allow me to read this passage, which is going to lead us into the idea of the process of writing, what it takes for you to write this kind of novel. So we have a courtroom scene, and there is an interrogation, and it goes something like this. How do you know the defendant? I first met the defendant, Mr. Kennedy Paul Maina, 5 months ago. He was in remand at Thika GK prison, awaiting trial for murder. My job was to evaluate him and determine his innocence. What do you mean by that? Traditional forensic psychiatry involves working with courts to determine an individual's competency to stand trial, or CST, and mental state at the time of the offense, or MSTO. But there is a new specialty which we shall call assumption of innocence, INO. So I was there to prove Mr. Maina's innocence. And did you do that? I was provided with copies of the police circumstances and the pre-trial proceeding. I also had access to Kennedy Maina's medical records. I had several sessions with Kennedy Maina, and in my opinion, 4 months after visiting him, is that Kennedy Paul Maina is innocent. Objection, Your Honor. The witness is already passing judgment, the prosecutor said. Your Honor, my witness is giving a testimony, not sitting at your seat, my lawyer counted. I'll allow it, the magistrate said. Courtroom scene. You seem to know a lot about the law. You seem to know a lot about the interior workings of the IT society. You seem to know a lot about secret societies, and you seem to know a lot. So you're a walking encyclopedia. How do you get all this information so that you possess it in a way that you can trundle it out in a novel?
It is research. The first thing as a writer, and any writer should do, is to research any setting, any plot they are going to have in their book. So all of that knowledge is from research and reading widely. Writers who write like yourself, who write your genre, and trying to also fit into the standard that is in the industry. Reason also being, you want an IT expert to relate with that scene when they read it, such that they're not going to say, this is fiction pushed too far.
You thanked, in your acknowledgements, you thanked a major for research on Maasai culture.
Yes.
What did he tell you that you didn't know about Maasai culture? What did you ask him? You went and said, what do Maasais eat? What did you ask him? When did Maasais come to Kenya? What did you ask him?
I was looking into their family relationships, their names, the foods that they eat, and especially burial ceremonies when it comes to unmarried women.
Thank you. I'm moving ahead because the questions are not for my benefit. They're the question of our viewers and our watchers. Yes. So let's move on. I take it that your questions are sound. I'm not going to sort of rib you on them. I would like to now turn to the idea of past. It says that at some point in your life, you took a diploma in creative writing from the Writers' Bureau UK. Does a writer need to be taught how to write? And once taught how to write, are you writing to a recipe?
Yes, a writer needs to be taught. Reason is you are honing your skills. When you submit your work to a publisher and it is taken to an editor, the first thing they look at is how it is structured. If they meet structural errors, they meet grammatical errors in the first few chapters, chances are your manuscript is going to be rejected. You cannot say you are a natural writer and you are not getting such skills right. So there is need for writers to be professionally trained.
Are you, let's put it in the more hard-hitting way, are you as a writer simply aping the white man's ways? So there's nothing original about Vincent de Paul. He's writing like John Grisham. Is that an accusation that you take on board? Where does the originality come in?
There is one thing I believe, and it is a fact yet to be disputed, there is nothing original in this world. Everything you think you are doing for the first time has been done. So what we do as writers is learn the style, how this writer is using language, how they are employing dialogue, and learn from them. The bad thing will be to copy exactly what they are doing, but it is about learning from them.
Right. Seconds are ticking away. I do want to go through my wish list of questions. This whole idea of African culture, it's unlike our culture. Africans don't do this. It seems to me that as an African writer, Vincent de Paul, you write about sex and the sexual act, and you describe it, but you don't warn any teenager walking into the shop to avoid your books because such descriptions occur. I'd like you to comment on that.
One, my target audience are not teenagers. And the first thing a writer does is conduct a target audience analysis. They look at the demographics, the age, the occupation of this person so that they understand whom they are targeting. And also genre type of books, they have characters that delineate themselves from the rest. You'll not, when you look at this book, does not look young adult. So in that case is because my target audience is adult and there is no need of putting plus 18 on top of it because these are not movies.
Right, oh, so you dealt with. But the idea that we went about the African culture, the African tradition, it's very there. We've got a department in government which bans certain... I want you to comment on that. I'm talking to you as a writer. I'm not talking to you... Remember, we established this. What is your view about this idea of censorship and what is fitting for our reading public to read? And I'm just mentioning the sex as a sideshow but it's a bigger topic. Let's think big. Let's discuss big.
Generally, the censorship should be there.
It should be there.
For targeted audience.
Right.
I will give an example. Erotica in Africa is not well known because it is immoral to teach people sex. And we refer to sex in euphemisms like we sleep together, we having an affair, kwenda migigo, those kind of names. But these readers, they take this kind of content from Western literature. So for African, the censorship should be there. And I believe in ethical publishing. The ethical publishing is whereby if it is erotic content, you restrict the characters to 18 years and above. And that way, you are not encouraging children to engage in their activity.
Right, we must draw to a close, and I must repeat once again that whether I started off with book 2 or book 1, I enjoyed reading your book, and I enjoyed reading it from beginning to the end. And I'm glad that you've taken my questions in the spirit in which they were intended, which is to unpack and share the writer's craft with those many of us who are interested in it, and indeed who believe that it is sacred, that the word is sacred as a purveyor of the truth, of looking at ourselves. It's an important part of our society. So thank you very much for coming, but every person who's come so far has to deal with these 3 questions. Yes. And again, I gave you these questions before we met, and they're important. The first one is, we're going to give you a minute for each one, if you would, just a minute. What do you read, Vincent de Paul? Or rather, let's put the right stress. What do you read, Vincent de Paul?
I read anything that has ever been written, fiction, non-fiction, spiritual texts, especially comparative religion, so that I understand everything, because my characters will be either atheists, they'll be Christians, they'll be Muslims, so I read everything, including newspapers, magazines. I don't read a particular writer to read as many books as possible. I read as many writers as possible.
Thank you. When do you read, and why do you think that it is important for an individual to read?
Anytime I have an opportunity, I read, and most of these opportunities come when I'm traveling a matatu. I'm with a book. On weekends, I take an hour or 2 to read, and not necessarily the hard copy. We also have audiobooks. So anytime I'm working, I'm listening to an audiobook. It is necessary to read to expound your knowledge, because the more you close yourself, for example, you say, I'm a Christian, I cannot read a Quran, you'll never know the aspects of religion in Quran. So there is need to read as many books as possible to expand your knowledge.
Last question. You are an author, and thank you very much for coming to the Mbogi as an author. Why do you write?
My main reason for writing for me is to entertain. I just feel nice when people tell me, I have loved your story. They relate with it. Then the second part will be catharsis. Sometimes it's cathartic for me to write.
Right, so we have to stop. I hope it's been entertaining is the word we want to use. So we, in true theatrical fashion from which I emanate, we are going to stand, and I'm going to lead you into a bow. But before we bow, I'm going to say, from the Multimedia Library of the Alliance Française de Nairobi, à la prochaine, till next time. Here we go.